There's this show called Barry, and every time I finish watching it, I need to lay down and just have a fucking mental breakdown, which is what this video is. Quick heads up before I start, I will be discussing events that happen in season 1 and 2 in depth, as if you have already seen the show. And the show is described as a dark comedy, and while it is funny a lot of the time, it's also real fucking sad and can be very serious. I'm going to be talking about murder and suicide, so here is your spoiler and content warning. However, before I get into the existential juicy shit, I am gonna start by gushing about how much I love all of the characters, specifically their actors and how they're written, because I actually hate a good chunk of them. I am gonna limit myself to just 5 characters because this shit is long enough and we do not have all day. Let's start with NoHo Hank, the boy Honk. He is me and my friend's favorite character and perhaps the best character in the entire show. In our opinion, of course, however, we all know we're right. He has been a consistent source of comedy and lightheartedness throughout the show, and even though he's a Chechen mob member who's had people killed and most definitely has killed someone himself, he's just so polite and he's got like such a himbo energy that you just can't help but love him, even when he's threatening to kill Barry's friends or scheming to kill the head of the Burmese mafia. Like, Anthony Carrigan is just amazing as Hank, and he brings so much life to the character. Like, he's so charismatic, and I keep forgetting he's most definitely killed people because every time I see him on screen, I just can't stop smiling. Like, he has such witty one-liners, and he's just such an amazingly written character. Like, he's so full of joy, and it's just, again, so refreshing. And he's just well-needed dose of comedy in this depressing-ass show. Now, Kusano, me and my friend have mixed feelings about, mainly because he reminds us so much of our acting teachers, like, to the point where every single time he's on screen, we try to figure out which teacher he reminds us most of in that moment. Now, Kusano is seen as a very selfish, self-centered man, specifically in season 1. Like, his class applauds him whenever he enters the room. The book that he assigns on acting is written by him. I mean, Jesus Christ, his class cheer is his fucking name. And, as we learn in season 2, when we meet his son Leo, he was a rather selfish father, like, mostly cared about only himself. However, we do know that he cares very deeply for his students. Like, we see in episode 7 of season 2 where he's talking to Fuchs and he's saying how he sees himself as a father figure to his students and how he's proud of them. And we also know that he cares about his son because in season 2 we see him attempting, and while he is failing, he is attempting to reconcile with his son. And holy shit, Henry Winkler is so phenomenal as Kusano. Like, especially during the more serious scenes. Like when Kusano is traveling with Fuchs to find Detective Janice Moss, his girlfriend, and how he seemed so hopeful when he called Barry to tell him about it, versus the absolute despair that we see when he finally sees Moss's body, versus the absolute catatonic state that he's in throughout the entirety of episode 8. And, like, he is so absolutely phenomenal. Like I said, like, there's so many scenes where oh my god, I just can't put it into words how much I love this man and his portrayal of Kusano. Oh my god, he is just so amazing and his character is so amazingly written. Again, I could go on for hours about how much I love Kusano, but at the same time, I just can't put it into words. I love him so much. Now, we get into Fuchs. Fucking Fuchs. Me and the homies hate Fuchs, but I will get into that in a second. So, Fuchs is seen as Barry's father figure, in the first season, before Barry starts to spend more time with Kusano. He's sort of like Barry's agent, but instead of sending him out on auditions, he sends him out on hits, which I find funny for some reason. And Fuchs is a funny character. Like, he's got a lot of witty dialogue, and his interactions with other characters are really entertaining. And he's also seen to be rather manipulative and pretty clever, but at the same time, he's kind of dumb as rocks. And there's this one part in season 2 where he works, quote unquote, with a detective in order to get Barry's confession for Detective Moss's murder. But every single time he had an opportunity to get Barry to confess, he didn't want to. Like, he was actively trying to stop Barry from confessing, and he even appeared upset when Barry managed to confess. However, the reason my friend and I hate Fuchs is because he's the reason Kusuno knows that Barry killed his girlfriend. Because he was mad at Barry for leaving and saying he didn't have any moves because without him, Fuchs is nothing. So, like the petty bastard that he is, he found Moss's body after Barry hid it, then he took Kusuno there and called the police pretending to be Kusuno and confessing to Moss's murder. It just, my god, hate him. However, Stephen Rootman, oh my god, he is, I bet he's a great person in real life. However, I fucking hate Fuchs. Yet, somehow, Root manages to constantly convince me that he actually cares for Barry, and that I always become hopeful that maybe this time he won't betray Barry, and maybe this time he won't be such a dick. And he's just so charming as Fuchs that you can't help but like him, even when you know what's coming. Like, I rewatched it with my friend recently, and I genuinely enjoyed Fuchs, and I enjoyed his and Barry's relationship, and I was rooting for them to, be friends, even though I knew what was gonna happen. It was crazy. Like, Stephen Root is absolutely amazing as Fuchs. And again, like I said, with both Kusuno and Hank, I could go on about Stephen Root for so long, because he is just so amazing. Okay, now let's get on to Sally. My friend doesn't like Sally too much. Like, she thinks she's kind of annoying. However, legitimately, Sally is my second favorite character in the entire show, right behind Hank. Like, I love her so much. Throughout the first season, Sally is seen to be kind of selfish. Like, she's constantly using Barry to drive her to auditions or run lines with her, but whenever Barry needs her to be there for him, she isn't. Like, in the 7th episode of the first season, Barry's kind of freaking out because he just killed his best friend, and Sally thought that he was digging up these dark emotions in order to help her out with the scene, so she was thanking him for going there. And we the audience knew what was happening, so we were kind of understandably annoyed with her, but objectively, it would make sense for her to act like that because she doesn't know about his job. She doesn't know what he just did. She doesn't know that he killed his best friend. Like, objectively, it makes no goddamn sense why we would be annoyed with her. And in season 2, you see her begin to prioritize the acting group over auditions, and you see her truly want to be vulnerable with her friends. But, like, and I don't know about you guys, but I just, again, love her so much. Like, oh my god, Sarah Goldberg is astounding as Sally. Her delivery is just so amazingly convincing. Like, the way you can see the emotion building in her in certain scenes. Like, when Kusuno's yelling at her in the first season, or when she's talking about her abuse in the second season. And the way you can see her trepidation when she's talking to her ex. Like, okay, I know someone who acts pretty much the same as she does. No names. You know who I'm talking about. And I just, oh my god, I need to mention how heart-wrenching the scene of everyone praising her on her scene in the season 2 finale where she changed it in order to make herself seem stronger because she was so afraid of being vulnerable. Like, oh my god, that scene manages to make me cry every single time. And like all the others, I could spend hours talking about how much I love Sarah and her portrayal of Sally, but we don't have all day. Now, last but certainly not least, Barry, my dude, our beloved socially awkward hitman. My friend loves Barry, but for me, he is on thin fucking ice. Objectively, Barry is an awful human being, right? He's a hitman, he's got violent tendencies, he's got uncontrollable mood swings, he's somehow both a giant doormat and incredibly selfish. But subjectively, he is one of my favorite characters in the entire show, simply because he is so well written. He is the perfect example of how a protagonist in a piece of media doesn't need to be a good person. Because, like, as we've seen with fans of the show, he could do the worst thing imaginable. Yet since the show is told from his point of view, the audience immediately empathizes with his actions and forgives him so easily. Like, okay, Bill Hader did such an incredible job bringing Barry to life. Like, the way he pays attention to little details that make his character so real. Like, in episode 7, season 1, where he's doing that kind of hand flap thing when he was upset, Hader mentioned in an interview that he copied the gesture from one of his daughters when she got really angry, and it is such a good characterization for Barry because it characterizes him as someone who, when experiencing strong emotions, becomes somewhat of a child, which I will talk about. Do not worry. And again, I can go on and on and on talking about Barry, but I will spare you that. But those 5 characters and every single point that I brought up with them, those are what I love about the characters and how they're written. They're allowed to be human. They're allowed to be selfish and flawed, and it is so refreshing to see because not a single one of them is perfect. And it's just, mwah, so good. However, it is now time for the good shit that you have been waiting for. Now, okay, the whole point of Barry joining the acting class in the first place is because he wants to find his purpose. At first, Fuchs had convinced him that his purpose was killing bad guys. However, after one acting class, he started to believe that maybe acting was his purpose. And what's so interesting about his character is that in the first season, especially the first half, he didn't really have any motivation. He just kind of did whatever anyone told him to do, no questions asked. Like, Fuchs would tell him to carry out a hit and he would just do it. Ryan Madison said, "Hey dude, read this scene with me," and he just did it even though he was supposed to kill the guy. But when Kusuno started to get on his ass about not being such a doormat and to grow some balls, he stood up to Fuchs and told him he doesn't want to be a hitman anymore and to fuck off. But, Fuchs didn't like that because Fuchs is a little bitch. But, of course, Barry doesn't hold his own very long, and when Fuchs is threatened by the Chechens, he does the job. Now, based on flashbacks shown throughout Season 2, we can guess from Barry's reaction to his military buddies giving him some positive attention after he killed some guys is that he was probably neglected as a child, so he appears to be craving some kind of positive affection in any way possible. And the only time prior to Season 1 that he appears to get that positive attention is from killing people, based on his military buddies chanting his name and Fuchs being Fuchs whenever he finishes a job. Then, as we see in the first episode of Season 1, the first time he received a positive reaction from something other than killing people was when he performed in front of Kusuno's acting class, and they all applauded, even though they were technically applauding his scene partner, Ryan Madison, who was also his hit. And you could see Barry kind of like take a moment and pause and kind of react like, oh, people like it when I do that. Like, they applaud me when I do that. I like that, so I want to keep doing that. Now, this whole acting thing and his craving for positive attention, which, first of all, mood, shows that he must have gone through some kind of, trauma as a child, possibly neglect, like I said, which caused him to need to grow up fast, hence why he's seen to act like a child whenever he experiences new or strong emotions. Told you I'd bring that up. And he just wants to get that attention however he can. And now, knowing that he can get that attention somewhere other than Fuchs, he believes he can just leave his old life behind and throw himself completely into acting. Here's the thing, though. Barry's been killing people for a while. He's been doing this, most likely ever since he was discharged from the military, so that's 10 plus years of killing people. You can't just decide, oh, you know what? I like acting more than I like killing people. I'm gonna quit being a hitman and become an actor. It's not that easy, and the show actively shows the audience how difficult it is for Barry to escape both those who know who he is and what he does, and his own subconscious need for Fuchs's approval from killing people. Now, some other obstacles Barry has for leaving his life as a hitman are, one, like I said, he's already killed a bunch of people, so he's unable to just sweep that under the rug. Two, we know that the Chechens and Fuchs are willing to threaten and or hurt people that he cares about in order to get him to do a job for them. And three, Barry doesn't seem to have any control over his anger, and he would most definitely go on a killing spree if something happened to Sally or Kusuno or anyone in the acting class, which would cause him to snap and revert back to that darkness that he has in him, like we see happen at the end of Season 2. And as I just mentioned, Barry's prone to outbursts of anger, which we see shown in this trend that happens in Season 2, where Barry does this, slow, dramatic turn to face towards a person, and that's how you know he's definitely gonna kill the person he's turning to out of anger. And that's what really solidifies the fact that he needs to go through some intensive therapy in order to help with that, or he needs to conclude in a way we will talk about in the conclusion. Because he has no control over that anger. And if he has no control, he will end up killing more people out of that anger, and that will cause him more regret. And he'll go down this dark spiral, which will cause that depressive state that he was talking about in the first episode. And then he'll probably go find Fuchs again, or Fuchs will find him, and he'll all but beg for forgiveness and ask for another job, and the cycle just continues endlessly. And I just need to mention this somewhere, so I'm just throwing this in here. There's also a parallel scene that happens in the first and last episode of the second season. Like, okay, in the first one, we see Barry leaving a dark hallway and entering a light opening before he talks about a show that represents his success in being able to basically leave his life of killing behind and fully indulge himself into acting. However, in the last episode, we see Barry leaving a light opening and entering a dark hallway after killing a bunch of people, representing his failure of moving past his life of killing and his spiral down a dark path. And I love that parallel so much, I just needed to put that in here somewhere. Now, I do feel like more people are going to find out about his job, unfortunately, because there is no way he can keep it a secret for too long. Like, it's been 2 seasons, and 4 outsiders have already found out about his life. 3 of them being killed, and 1 of them finding out at the absolute last second of the second season. So there appears to be this sort of trend with people finding out he's a hitman and then getting killed, either directly or indirectly because of Barry. Now, in the last episode of the second season, Kusino found out that Barry killed Detective Janice Moss, his girlfriend, and that is 100% going to do some shit to Barry's psyche when Kusino confronts him about it, because we've seen what happens when someone says, "I'm gonna tell the police what you did or what you do." Barry freaks out and kills them. This has happened twice in the show, once with his friend Chris, and another time with Detective Moss. And what's really, disheartening about this is that Kusino is kind of like a father figure to Barry. Like, he even calls himself that in episode 7 of season 2, but we also know that Barry has this drilled into his head that he needs to kill whoever is threatening his peace, which is basically the ignorance of his friends in the acting group. And whoever threatens that, no matter how close they are, he feels that he needs to get rid of them by any means. So, unfortunately, the most realistic way for that plotline to end is Barry killing Kusino. And also, one more warning, this is the part of the commentary that gets a lot more serious. There is this one part in season 1 where I don't want to think of it as this. However, unfortunately, it might be a case of accidental foreshadowing for how Barry ends. And that's the scene where they bring in this hitman from Chechnya, Stovka, and he's talking about how his life is only death and how everyone he loves has left him. And he kills himself. The only way for the show to realistically end, like the only way for Barry to leave his life behind without hurting all of his friends and seeing them turn against him, is he either gets killed by one of his enemies or he kills himself. The whole plot shows an endless cycle of him trying to be a different person, something causing him to snap, and him reverting back to his old ways of killing. And while I don't want to describe suicide as poetic, because that is an absolutely shitty thing to do, and I don't think that at all, in the realm of this story, again, I hate saying this, suicide would be the more poetic way for the show to end, because it's all about Barry and him making the choice to leave, to stop being a hitman, and with suicide, he's choosing to die. He's choosing to die as an actor and not a hitman. However, if he gets killed, it's not his choice, which would be an even more upsetting way for the show to end, because he never got the chance to be something else. He lived as a hitman, and in this scenario, he died as a hitman. Now, I wish I could tell you that there was a better way for the show to end. I wish I could tell you that I sat down and thought about it and was able to come up with a scenario where he goes to therapy and he gets his anger under control and he goes to the Chechens and Fuchs and explains that he wants to be an actor and not a hitman, and they all respect his choices and they leave him alone. But realistically, there's no way that's going to happen. There's no way they're going to let him go that easily. There's no way for the show to end, like with him to leave the life of a hitman without Barry dying. Now, let's go with the scenario that Barry cuts off all ties with the Chechens and Fuchs and anyone who knows he's a hitman. Like, he refuses to answer them, he throws away any kind of job descriptions, he just doesn't do anything for them. Fuchs and the Chechens know where the acting class is. They know all of Barry's friends in the acting class. They would 100% threaten and take action to get rid of the actors in order to get Barry to do a job for them. And Kusino knows that Barry killed Detective Moss. And if he confronts him about it, which he absolutely will, there isn't a scenario where Barry doesn't kill Kusino. So, in that scenario, there isn't a way for this to go where there isn't at least one casualty. Or let's go with the scenario that Barry is able to kill anyone who knows that he has killed either Detective Moss or that he's a hitman. He'll kill Fuchs, he'll kill the Chechens, he'll kill anyone, okay? Let's say that he manages to do that. One, that list includes Kusino, which we've already mentioned is not a good thing. Barry just shouldn't kill Kusino. Two, that's just more blood on his hands. That is more regret that he's going to have to live with. And it will cause so much regret that, again, he will spiral. Or, even worse, someone manages to find out that he's killed at least Kusino, and they'll confront him about it. And then he will kill them. And then more people will find out that he's killed these people, and they'll confront him, and he'll kill them. And then finally, someone manages to find out and not confront him and just turn him into the police. So, like I've been saying, there is no scenario where Barry manages to live and leave his life as a hitman. The only way for him to leave his life is to die. And like I keep saying, I wish there was a better way for the show to end, but realistically, there really isn't. Or, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is some way for Barry to leave his life behind without dying, and I just haven't thought of it. But, if you have thought of it, please comment it, and I will take a look. But yeah, you know the drill. Like, comment, subscribe, the whole 9 yards. And thank you for listening to me ramble about Barry for way too goddamn long. Bye!